could we hand over to Gastón, who's going to talk, what would Hemingway say to a marketeer? You ready, Gastón?
Yes.
All yours.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, there are not many faces, but it's great to see real faces again.
Readily acceptable afterwards.
Great. Well, for the ones who stay, I'm going to discuss today is what would Hemingway say to a marketeer? And this is a question that I have been focused for the last 3-4 years. It all started because actually what I saw in the advertising industry in general is a lot of talk around storytelling. What is good storytelling? What are good stories? And I found that most of them were actually not good stories. Most of them were not stories that we would feel proud of saying, like, look, this is a story that I would tell someone else. One of my favorite cartoons is this one. Can you imagine a child telling like their parents to tell a bedtime branded content, and clearly not. I think like we talk a lot about like stories, narratives in the advertising industry, but majority of it is just pure branded content that people wouldn't find interesting. So having known that, having seen that most advertising storytelling really falls flat, I have been asking myself, how can we improve this? But first of all, I have to say, I am probably one of the first people to be guilty of it. Actually, a few years ago, more or less 5-6 years ago, I was working at YouTube. And one day when there was a lot of different kind of developments going on with YouTube, you probably remember all the crisis around like terrorism and what was going on with the platform. One of the VPs of marketing from YouTube asked me, can you please focus on rewriting the story of YouTube? And the first thing I did when it came to rewriting the story of YouTube, it was something like this. It was a diagram. And immediately I thought, like, why do we use this type of patterns to write stories when actually, when it comes to writers, like when you actually speak to fiction writers, they would never use a diagram to come up with a narrative or a story. At the same time that I was actually writing this story for YouTube, I was doing a master's in creative writing at Oxford. And whenever we came to write a story in that kind of environment, we usually tended to use this type of template. It was never a diagram. It was always a story arc. What are the differences between these diagrams that we tend to use quite a lot in business storytelling and this type of story arc? Immediately, what you can see is like the diagram is timeless. The diagram doesn't have time in it. Whereas like these story arcs that actually most writers use, what you see has highs and lows. It has moments of sadness, but also moments where there is a climax and there is something happy in it. And I think probably most advertising storytelling falls flat because there are no happy moments. There are not really strong moments or moments of conflict that keep the audience going. So when it came to YouTube in that case, I decided to really focus on using this template, the story arc. And also, I decided to go back to one of the most important fiction writers to learn how I could use some of those learnings, how can I use some of those principles to tell better stories in advertising. That writer is Ernest Hemingway. I was in that meeting kind of asking myself how we could improve the story of YouTube, but rather than going back to business books, what I decided to do, it was really go back to one of the best fiction writers and ask myself, what would Hemingway say, what would Hemingway tell to a marketeer to improve marketing storytelling? And I think based on this book that is called On Writing, there's probably 3 tips that he would give to any marketeer. Let's start with the first one. The first tip that I think Hemingway would tell us when it comes to telling better marketing stories is to grab people's attention from the word go. What do I mean by this? This is the start. This is the opening line of one of the most beautiful stories from Hemingway that is called The Short, Happy Life of Francis Macomber. And the first sentence of that short story says, "It was now lunchtime and they were all sitting under the double green fly of the dining tent, pretending that nothing had happened." That's the opening sentence, and I think it's a brilliant example of good storytelling because immediately you can see there that there is something that is not okay, that there is something that is wrong. Why are they pretending that nothing had happened? That sparks your curiosity and keeps you going to read the story. Yet most advertising doesn't have this type of opening sentences or this type of opening few minutes or seconds to keep the audience interested and really drive their curiosity. However, if we go back to the history of advertising, one of the first ads, and actually one of the best direct response ads from the 20s, was from John Caples. And he used exactly the same resource to write his advert. This is the advert. It's from 1924, right after the First World War. There was an economic crisis, and brands had to really reactivate the economy. This copywriter, he was in charge of trying to sell more pianos. And what he did, it was write this advert. It was a full-page advert, but the first sentence was, "They laughed when I sat down at the piano, but when I started to play." And again, you can see the same principle from Hemingway. It's really starting to, in a way, in those first few seconds, or like that first line, leave something open for the reader to really, really bring that reader into the story and try to drive more interest and spark that curiosity. This is not just for advertising. It really applies to any piece of communication. And this is actually one of the stores that we open with Appear Here. I'm CMO of Appear Here, which is one of the world's largest marketplaces for retail spaces. What we do is basically try to bring brands to the real life by launching stores. And this is a store that launched with us this year in London, and it's called Supermarket of Dreams, and it was incredibly successful. And I think it was incredibly successful in a great part thanks to the same principle that I was discussing before. It was really grabbing people's attention from the beginning. In this case, the storefront. It was a supermarket, but it was a supermarket of dreams. And I think that unexpected, that kind of like message of supermarket, which is more functional, but combined with dreams, which is something that you would never associate with a supermarket, work really well to bring people in the store. So that's the first principle from Hemingway. There are two more to go. We're going to go to the second one, which is telling the truth, words and all. I think this is a very, very interesting principle that perhaps most advertising ignores. We are always trying to portray the happy side of life. I think most advertising is probably around people running through the fields, like eating ice cream and being happy. But actually, the best type of marketing is the marketing that doesn't shy away from showing what is wrong with your brand and what is not working. Not sure if you know this advert, but again, I'm going back to the history of advertising. This is an advert from the 60s. There was a moment where Volkswagen needed to sell a small car in America. So you can imagine Americans prefer big cars, so it wasn't easy for Volkswagen to try to enter this market. But what they did is, rather than try to shy away from the fact that they had a small car, they actually used that feature as their selling point. And they launched this campaign in the US in the 60s that talks about thinking small and how being a small and ugly car is actually an advantage. You might wonder what happened. Well, what happened is that actually Volkswagen in the US increased sales by 25% that year, just by being honest and not shying away from who they are. Let's use more recent examples. This one is one of my favorites from the last few years. It's from Kentucky Fried Chicken. Again, Kentucky Fried Chicken had an issue. They ran out of chicken. They sell chicken, so clearly that's not a good thing if you're a chicken brand. But rather than shying away, rather than saying, just a kind of typical corporate apology when they ran out of chicken. What they did is really use this as a marketing moment, to be honest. And let's just be honest, like if you are running a fried chicken shop and you run out of chicken, your first response is not going to be a corporate apology. Your first response is going to be, fuck, I'm sorry, I ran out of chicken. And that's exactly what they did. They even play with their logo to put that fuck in the advert. And I think it's a brilliant example of how honest storytelling can really build more relatable stories with your audiences. Another example from a brand that I love, Netflix, is quite a recent example from Spanish-speaking countries. What they did is, I think most brands, like any brand that is here in the room, can recognize that usually you get a lot of hater content on Twitter. Usually you get people just ranting about your brand on Twitter. It's not a platform where people share positive news about your brand. Most brands try to, again, shy away from that. But what Netflix did, which was brilliant, is they put all those haters, all the tweets against Netflix on billboards around the city. This is in Madrid, it was in Buenos Aires, in Spanish-speaking cities. So they put this tweet, for example, that says, the Netflix movie catalog is like my exams. A couple of things that are okay, then a lot of crap to fill. You might wonder why Netflix is doing this, why Netflix is actually putting hater tweets on billboards. They follow that with this. We're working on it. We love Netflix. And I think what is brilliant here is that, again, they were not trying to pretend to be something that they are not. They're actually admitting their flaws, and you as a customer feel much closer to that brand. And it's exactly the same in any relationship. Think a bit about your friends, think about new acquaintances. Whenever they recognize a flaw, you feel much closer to that person. Even on a date as well. Like imagine going out on a date with Mr. Perfect or Mrs. Perfect. Nobody wants that. You actually want a flaw in order to start, I think, building that empathy, building that rapport with someone. So, final tip from Hemingway. We talk about attention-grabbing openings. We talk about admitting your flaws. The last one is around making a scene. And making a scene in storytelling and in real life is exactly the same. Whenever we say that someone is making a scene, it means being disruptive. And I think most advertising storytelling forgets that, how important it is to be disruptive in order to grab people's attention. But the best brands are definitely making a scene when it comes to their advertising and storytelling. This is a quote from John Le Carre that I think we all need to start recognizing how powerful it is to create better adverts. What John Le Carre said is, the cat sat on the mat is not a story, but the cat sat on the dog's mat is a story. So a question that all of us, we need to ask whenever we are putting together an advert or a brief is like, who is the dog in our story? Because if there is not a dog, there is not really a story. If it's just a statement, if it just shows the positive things in life without that conflict, there is definitely not story to be told. One of my favorite examples about kind of like having that dog in your advertising is from Bumble. I used to work for the company, and one of the things that happened, particularly in the early stages of Bumble, is that although the platform was like female first, there were still a lot of users who were not respecting the community guidelines. And particularly there was this guy called Connor. Connor was, let's say, just a finance bro who was like surprised that a woman was asking him what was his job. And he immediately interpreted that a woman asking him, what's your job, was trying to, in a way, get money out of him. So for sure, as a female-first platform, we were not happy with Connor. Most brands, what they would do is just like ban him and then move on. We decided to make a scene out of this. And what we did is write an open letter to Connor. You can see here, it says, "Dear Connor, it has been brought to our attention that you lost your cool on one of our female users, Ashley. She made small talk, you felt personally attacked. She mentioned her workday and asked about yours. You assume she was prying into your financial status. Given we're all working women ourselves, we're going to venture a guess into Ashley's intentions here. Take a seat, Connor, because this concept may blow your mind. Women nowadays work. It's happened gradually, we know, but the majority of women from our generation have jobs. So you can see how Bumble here is really making a scene out of this user who was not respecting the community guidelines, and that really drew a lot of attention from press. You can see here some of the headlines. Bumble bans sexist finance bro after he sent abusive messages. Bumble pens explosive open letter to abusive user. Bumble shames male user for calling woman a gold-digging whore. So making a scene really helped also Bumble to remind the community about their values and who they are as a brand. Let's watch a video, another example of how you can make a scene, in this case, from Google.
The first thing I will say to you is hi. How are you? How are you doing today? That's the first word I say it in America when I come and I start meet people. The first word I say it is hi. My name is Mahmoud. I'm from Iraq. I born in Baghdad. I grew up speaking Arabic. When I tell people I'm from Iraq, they think I live in a country where there is a desert, we don't have TV, and we have horses, no cars. I mean, that makes me laugh because we have everything. We had an amazing life. When I was 13 years old, it was the worst days in my life. Just hearing bomb and all my family, my cousin, uncles, we all go to my grandparents' house and we said, if something happened, if bomb falling, we die together. I remember I just stay and everyone cry and everyone praying and dark, there's no electricity. When I was 18, I wanted to help my country. I decided to work with the US military. And my cousin told me, oh, they're going to call you to test your English. And I said, I don't speak any English. My English was zero. Like, I don't know how to say hi. And I was like, think. So we have internet only at home. And we have Google Translate. I take Google Translate and I translate how to say, hi, good morning, sir. I am so excited to come tomorrow. I start work there and they told me, your English is not that great. Every day I start learning one word more. Saying something in Arabic, find it in English, write it, practice it, and come back, do it again. I collect words, paper, date, address, today, tonight, tomorrow. After 9 months working at my job, I received mail with bullet inside, and I open the mail at home and I see the word saying, you work with our enemy, United States. And if you don't leave in 24 hours, we will kill you and we will kill all your family. My father got shot, but he survived and we left Iraq and we moved to Jordan quick. United Nations, next of kin, application, refugee. After waiting 1.5 years, the UN, they tell us, you go into America. And I come to this state and it's called Connecticut. Where can I leave my car? I am thirsty. Hurry up. Everyone like, hurry up. I am very tired. I am lost. It was so difficult. And I really realized like, this is a new country. I don't know anybody. But I just see myself, I start have more conversation with people. And that gives me feeling of, I speak different language now. And still remembering the first day when I learned how to say, hi and good morning and how are you? If you feel you don't have the opportunity, never ever give up. My advice is take it day by day, word by word.
I think this is a great example of making a scene because as you can see, it's an advert for Google, but it's not really an advert for Google. It's talking about Mahir's struggles and then bringing it back to how Google Translate has really changed the life for one person. And I think that's another principle when it comes to making a scene. Always bring it back to individuals, always bring it back to real people. So there are more tips that you can take from that book called On Writing from Hemingway, but at least these three, I think, are principles that we all need to start applying to advertising to make it much more interesting. Always think about that opening sentence, always think about those opening 5 seconds, because they are the ones that are going to make it or break it. Tell the truth, which means admitting your flaws. Don't shy away from what's not working. Actually, if we look at Netflix, if we look at KFC, what they did was really admit what was not going well, and you feel much closer to those brands because of that. And then finally, make a scene. Be dramatic, because if not, you're going to lose people. So you might wonder what happened with the YouTube story that I talked at the beginning. I said I tried to use one of those business diagrams that we all learn, and actually I moved away from it and actually tried to start thinking how we can use Hemingway's storytelling to improve YouTube story. Well, this is what happened. In the end, this is the story that we came up with for YouTube.
You want it to sound like this, right? Really good?
Look at these moments, all of these stories, secrets, revelations from every corner of the world. Every video a chance to walk in someone else's shoes, a reminder of how amazingly generous people are, how hilariously funny, and how heartbreakingly vulnerable humans can be.
Thank you guys so much for being here for me.
This is the rawest, purest, most unfiltered portrait of who we are as people. A celebration of what humans can do. Proof of our potential, a motor for our progress.
We only get one chance at life, and you're always going to be happy if you're going to be real with yourself.
This is what happens when you give everyone a voice, a chance to be heard, and a stage to be seen.
Julius Yago, they call him the YouTube man.
Whatever your thing is, well, here it can become the next big thing. That person who thought they were no one, they can become someone. That voice that thought it didn't matter, well, it can start a movement. Even when you feel all alone in the world, it's here you can find someone just like you.
Days like this is why I started, because otherwise I would just be doing this alone. This is what family's about right here.
That's the power of YouTube. That's the power of you. All of you.
So I hope you can see how some of those principles from Hemingway really help improve that narrative from YouTube that I talked at the beginning. So that's it. In case you want to talk about Hemingway, I'm going to be around here, and it was a pleasure to be at MathFest. Thank you very much.